The woman appeared at Cole Mercer's south fence just after 10 in the morning, walking where the wagon road ended and the grass began. And the first thing Cole noticed was not that she was alone, but that she kept looking behind her even though nothing followed. He stopped driving the fence post and watched her cross the last stretch of open ground with one hand gripping the front of her worn riding coat and the other hanging stiffly at her side. She had the posture of someone forcing tired legs to keep moving, yet she did not stumble once. When she reached the gate, she stopped several feet away from him instead of coming closer. Cole set the hammer against the post. "You lost?" She shook her head. "No." Her voice was low and dry. "Then you know where you are." She looked past him toward the ranch buildings, but never directly at his face. "I know." Cole studied her boots, the dust on her coat, and the thin scrape across one glove. She had ridden hard, but there was no horse with her. "Where is your horse?" Her eyes moved toward the road behind her again. "I left him." That answer made Cole look toward the distant bend. "Why?" She did not answer. Instead, she took one step backward when a hawk rose suddenly from the grass, and Cole saw the reaction clearly. Her shoulders tightened before she could control them. Fear, he thought, but not fear of a hawk. He walked to the gate and opened it without touching her. "You need water." She hesitated. "I need to keep moving." "You can do that after you drink." She finally stepped through. Halfway across the yard, a wagon appeared far down the road, moving slowly enough to be noticed, but too far away for its driver to be identified. Mara stopped walking. The color drained from her face. Cole looked at the wagon, then back at her. "Friend?" She shook her head. "No." The wagon continued toward the ranch. Mara turned as if she might run for the open pasture, but Cole spoke before she moved. "Don't look away." She stopped. He kept his voice calm. "You're safe on my land now." For several seconds, she stared at him, as though she had never heard those words without a price attached. Then the wagon turned onto the road leading toward the valley instead of the ranch, and only after it disappeared did Mara finally breathe again. Cole picked up the water bucket. "Come inside." This time she followed without looking back. Mara had barely finished the water when Cole noticed she kept listening toward the south road instead of drinking, and when he placed the cup back on the table, she asked whether his ranch had another way out besides the main trail. "There are 3, he said. "Why?" She looked at the window. "No reason." Cole did not press her. He walked outside to check the horses and found her following a few steps behind, still watching the road between glances at the pasture. Near the barn, she stopped beside an empty stall. "You keep horses here?" 6. A gray gelding?" Cole looked at her more closely. "Why?" "Mine is gray." That was the first time her voice changed. Not fear this time, but worry. "Where did you leave him?" She pointed towards the southern ridge. Cole took a saddle from the tack room and rode down alone, following the faint marks of hooves through dry grass until he found the gelding tied behind a cluster of cottonwoods nearly 2 miles from the ranch. The animal was restless, sweating under the saddle, and one leather stirrup had been cut almost through. Cole ran his fingers along the damaged strap and saw a clean knife mark beneath the torn leather. Someone had not broken it by accident. The horse lifted its head when Cole approached, then pulled hard against the reins as if trying to warn him away from the road. Cole returned with the gelding before noon and found Mara standing beside the barn, waiting. She saw the horse first and closed her eyes for 1 second. "I thought he was gone." "Someone cut his stirrup." Her face tightened. "I know." Cole studied her. "You knew?" She reached for the horse's neck and ran her palm slowly along the animal's shoulder. He threw me when the strap failed. Who cut it? She did not answer. Cole looked toward the road. Was it the wagon? Mara shook her head. No. She checked the horse's left foreleg, then crouched and examined the hoof before Cole could stop her. He is favoring this side. Cole watched her fingers move over the hoof wall with practiced confidence. You know horses. I worked around them most of my life. She stood and looked at the animal again. He needs rest before you ride him. Cole nodded because she was right. Then he noticed something tucked beneath the saddle blanket. A small brass key tied to a strip of black leather. Mara saw it at the same moment. Her hand moved toward it, but she stopped before touching it. Cole removed the blanket and held the key between two fingers. This yours? Mara stared at it for several seconds before answering. Yes. What does it open? She looked toward the distant road. Something I was never supposed to find. The key remained between Cole's fingers while Mara stood beside the gray gelding with one hand resting against its neck. And for several seconds, neither of them spoke because the question had become larger than the small piece of brass that caused it. Cole turned the key once in his palm. You stole it? Mara looked directly at him for the first time. No. Then why is someone looking for you? She swallowed before answering. Because I found something they did not want found. Cole slipped the key into his pocket instead of handing it back. What? I do not know yet. Her answer sounded honest enough that he believed it. Before he could ask another question, the ranch bell near the front gate rang once. Cole looked up. A rider was coming along the main road, dressed in a dark coat that stood out against the pale grass. Mara saw him too, and the change in her face was immediate. She stepped away from the horse and moved toward the barn. Who is that? Cole asked. Silas Reed. She said the name as if it carried a weight she had been trying to outrun. The rider stopped outside the gate and called for Cole. I am looking for a woman. Cole walked toward the fence but did not open it. Lots of women live in the valley. Silas smiled without warmth. This one worked at my ranch. She left yesterday without permission and took something that belongs to me. Cole glanced back toward the barn. Mara had disappeared from sight. What did she take? A brass key. Silas's eyes moved over Cole's shoulder toward the buildings. You have seen her. It was not a question. Cole rested one hand on the gate post. Suppose I have. Silas leaned forward in his saddle. Then you should understand that helping her will make you part of the problem. Cole looked at the cut stirrup hanging from the gray gelding saddle inside the barn. That horse was found tied 2 miles from here with a knife cut through the stirrup. Silas's expression changed for the briefest moment. Bad luck. Maybe. Cole opened the gate just enough to step through and close it behind him. But bad luck usually leaves rough edges. Silas stared at him. You do not know what you are protecting. Cole answered calmly. Neither do you know what I have decided. Silas's jaw tightened before he turned his horse toward the road. She will not stay hidden forever. After he disappeared around the bend, Cole returned to the barn and found Mara standing beside the gray gelding, her face pale but steady. She had heard everything. Cole took the brass key from his pocket and held it out. You can leave if you want. Mara stared at the key but did not take it. And if I stay? Cole closed his fingers around the brass. Then we find out what he is afraid of. The next morning, Mara was already at the barn when Cole came in from the south pasture, standing beside the gray gelding with a curry brush in one hand and the brass key in the other. She had not slept much, but she had made a decision before sunrise. "I should tell you what I found," she said. Cole leaned against the stall door and waited. Mara brushed the horse once along the shoulder before speaking. "I worked for Silas Reed for almost 2 years. He trusted me with the horses because I could tell when something was wrong before the stable hands noticed it." Cole said nothing. 3 weeks ago, one of his best mares became sick. Silas blamed the feed boy, but I knew the grain had been changed. The next morning, another horse was down. She stopped brushing. "I checked the storage room and found sacks marked for another ranch. The feed had been switched." Cole's expression hardened. "Why?" "I do not know." She reached beneath the saddle blanket and pulled out a small scrap of paper, folded several times. "I found this inside the feed room wall." Cole opened it carefully. It contained names, dates, and amounts written in a tight hand, along with deliveries that had never reached the ranch they were supposed to supply. "I took the key because I thought it opened the locked cabinet where the original records were kept." Cole looked up. "And Silas caught you?" "Not at first." Mara folded her arms. "I found the cabinet after midnight. Before I could open it, I heard him coming. I ran." She looked toward the barn doors. "He followed me to the stable. I saddled my horse and left through the north gate. He cut the stirrup after I reached the ridge." Cole studied the paper again. "Why did you not take this to the sheriff?" Mara gave a short, bitter laugh. "Silas supplies half the county." She took the paper back. "The sheriff would ask where I got it. Silas would say I stole it. Then I would be the one explaining myself." Cole understood then why she had arrived at his fence looking backward. She had not been running from one man. She had been running from the reach of his name. "The key opens the cabinet?" he asked. "I think so." "Where is it?" "Back at his ranch." Cole looked toward the distant valley. Mara immediately shook her head. "I am not asking you to go there." "Good." She looked surprised. "Then what are you asking?" Cole picked up the damaged stirrup and examined the clean knife cut again. "Nothing." He set it down. "You came here because you needed somewhere Silas could not order you from." Mara stared at him. "You would let me stay?" Cole nodded toward the empty bunkhouse room behind the barn. "Until you decide otherwise." She looked down at the brass key in her palm, then toward the road where Silas had disappeared the day before. For the first time since reaching the ranch, she stopped watching the road and looked instead at the open pasture beyond the barn. "Then I will work from my place." By the third morning, Mara had stopped asking where things were and started noticing what needed to be done, which was how Cole realized she had meant what she said about earning her place. Before breakfast, she found a section of the north corral leaning outward and braced it with a spare post while Cole was still checking the cattle. He came over expecting to correct the repair, but the post had been set at the right angle and driven deep enough to hold. "Who showed you that?" he asked. "No one," Mara said. "The fence showed me." Cole almost smiled, but the moment passed when a young calf pushed against the lower rail and the repaired section held firm. Later, while Cole checked the feed bins, Mara noticed one sack had been opened from the bottom instead of the top. She cut it open and found damp grain packed underneath the dry layer. "This will turn bad," she said. Cole crouched beside the sack and ran the grain through his fingers. "How soon?" "If the weather warms, sooner than you want." He moved the sack aside. "You have a good eye." Mara shrugged. "Bad feed costs more than good feed." That afternoon they worked together in the west pasture, separating 3 restless calves from the older cattle. Cole expected her to stay behind the gate, but she rode the gray gelding into the herd without hesitation, guiding the smallest calf away before it was trampled against the fence. Cole watched her bring it back toward the holding pen with a calm hand and a steady voice. When they returned to the barn, he asked, "Why did you leave Silas if you were good at the work?" Mara removed the saddle and hung the bridle. "Because being useful to someone does not give them the right to own you." Cole stopped tightening the cinch. He looked at her for several seconds, then nodded once. "No, it does not." They finished the evening without speaking much, but something between them had changed. She was no longer working because she needed to repay shelter, and he was no longer watching her as someone waiting for rescue. She had become part of the daily work. Just before sunset, Mara walked toward the outer pasture to bring in the gray gelding and stopped near the fence. Fresh hoofprints crossed the soft ground beyond the boundary, one set coming from the road and another turning toward the creek. She crouched and touched the nearest print. "Cole." He came over. She pointed toward the tracks. "Someone has been watching the ranch." Cole looked toward the road, then toward the tree line. "How long?" Mara stood slowly. "Long enough to know where we keep the horses." The gray gelding suddenly lifted its head toward the trees, and somewhere beyond the fence, a branch snapped. The branch snapped again. Closer this time, and Mara did not move toward the barn or behind Cole. She simply stood beside the fence, watching the tree line until a rider stepped into view. Silas Reed had come alone, and the fact that he had crossed the boundary without calling from the road told Cole more than any greeting could have. Cole walked forward while Mara stayed where she was. "You are on private land," he said. Silas looked past him toward Mara. "I came for what belongs to me." Mara answered before Cole could. "I do not." Silas dismounted and tied his horse to a fence post, as though he had every right to be there. "You took property from my ranch. I took a key and records." His eyes hardened. "You have no idea what those records mean." Mara stepped forward. "Then explain them." Silas looked at her for a long moment before giving a short laugh. "You were always too curious." Cole moved between them, but Mara touched his arm once and stepped around him. "Do not answer for me." Cole stopped immediately. Silas noticed that exchange, and his expression changed. "So that is what this is now?" he asked. "You hide behind a rancher?" Mara shook her head. "I came here because he gave me a choice." She took the brass key from her pocket and held it where Silas could see. "You never did." Silas's face tightened. "Give me the key." "No." He stepped closer. Cole did not raise his voice. "You heard her." Silas ignored him. "The cabinet contains records that could destroy people who have nothing to do with your little complaint." Mara looked straight at him. "Then you should have kept honest records." For the first time, Silas lost the polished calm he carried in town. "You do not understand what happens if those papers become public." Mara's hand lowered, but she did not retreat. "That is why you followed me here." Silas stared at her, then glanced toward Cole. "You think this man can protect you forever?" Mara answered before Cole could. "I am not asking him to." That sentence stopped both men. She looked at Cole only briefly, then back at Silas. "I am going back to your ranch." Cole's expression tightened. "Mara," she shook her head. "Not because he ordered me, because I want the truth out." Silas smiled again, but there was no confidence left in it. "Then come tomorrow." He mounted his horse and turned towards the road. "Bring the key." Mara watched him leave, then looked at Cole. "I need you to come with me." Cole picked up the reins of his horse. "Now you are asking?" She nodded. "Yes." He mounted. "Then we go together." They reached Silas Reed's ranch shortly after noon, with the sun high enough to leave no useful shadow near the main buildings, and Mara immediately recognized the same stable where she had worked for 2 years. She did not slow the horse. Cole rode beside her until they reached the rear of the feed barn, where a narrow door stood locked beneath a faded storage sign. Mara dismounted and held up the brass key. "This is it." Cole looked at the lock. "Then open it." She hesitated only once before turning the key. The door opened into a dark room smelling of old grain and dry wood. Along the back wall stood 3 storage cabinets, but Mara walked directly to the middle one. "I saw him put the records here," she said. The key fit the lower lock. Inside were ledgers, delivery slips, and sealed envelopes stacked in careful rows. Mara lifted the first ledger and opened it across the nearest table. The numbers matched the names on the paper she had taken from the wall, but the entries went back nearly a year. Feed had been purchased for several ranches, then quietly diverted and sold elsewhere at higher prices. Worse, some shipments had been marked as delivered, even though the receiving ranches had never received them. Cole turned another page and stopped. His own ranch name appeared among the listed deliveries. "You were selling feed meant for my cattle?" he asked, though Silas was not there to answer. Mara found another page beneath it. "Look." A second column showed replacement feed bought cheaply after the original shipments disappeared. The same cheap feed had been blamed for the sickness among Silas's horses. Cole understood immediately. Silas had been taking paid shipments, replacing them with inferior feed, then blaming employees when animals became sick. Mara closed the ledger. "Now we know." A floorboard creaked behind them. Both turned. Silas stood in the doorway, but this time his confidence was gone. He looked at the open cabinet and then at the ledger in Mara's hands. "You should not have come back." Mara held the book against her chest. "I had to." Silas took one step inside. Cole stepped between them, but Mara moved beside him instead of behind him. "You wanted the key because you thought I would be afraid to use it," she said. "I was afraid." Silas looked at her scars from the horse accident, and then at her face. "You should have stayed afraid." Mara shook her head. "That is what you were counting on." Outside the barn, hoofbeats sounded on the main road. This time, they were not Silas's. Mrs. Rowan Pike entered the yard with the sheriff and 2 ranch owners from the valley, all carrying the same delivery records Mara had just found. The sheriff took the ledgers from Mara's hands before Silas could reach them, and for once he had no polished answer ready, because the records contained names, dates, payments, and deliveries that could be checked against every ranch listed in the books. Mrs. Rowan placed the second set of delivery papers beside them, and one of the ranch owners immediately recognized his own missing shipment. Another found his name on a page showing feed he had never received. Silas tried to blame an employee, then a clerk, then a mistake in the records, but each explanation collapsed against another page. Mara stood beside Cole through all of it, answering only when asked, and never stepping behind him when Silas looked her way. By late afternoon, the sheriff had taken the ledgers and sealed the cabinet, while Silas was ordered to remain in town until the records could be reviewed. Outside the barn, Mara stopped beside the gray gelding and ran a hand along its neck. The cut stirrup had been replaced weeks earlier, the leather now stronger than before. Cole walked up carrying the saddle. "You can go back to the ranch," he said. Mara looked towards the valley road. "I could. You could also leave." She studied him for a moment. "Would you want me to?" Cole did not answer quickly. "No." The word was quiet, but certain. Mara looked down at the reins in her hand. "That is different from asking me to stay." "Yes." She smiled faintly. Good. They rode back to Cole's ranch before sunset, but the road felt different now because Mara was no longer watching every bend for someone following her. When they reached the south fence, she dismounted before Cole and opened the gate herself. The gray gelding walked through calmly, heading toward the pasture as though the ranch had become familiar ground. Cole tied his horse near the barn and looked toward the empty bunkhouse room. You can have the room as long as you want. Mara shook her head. I want the small house near the north pasture. Cole raised an eyebrow. That roof leaks. Then I will fix it. He looked at her for a long second. You already decided? Mara smiled. I decided when I stopped looking at the road. The next morning, sunlight reached the north pasture before either of them finished breakfast. Mara stood on the porch of the small house with a hammer in one hand and a bundle of boards beside her. Cole approached carrying 2 more boards. She looked at him. You came to help? He set the boards down. I came because the roof still leaks. Mara laughed softly and handed him the hammer. Then stay. He took it, and neither of them looked toward the road again.